I want to address this morning, with your help and inspiration and the support of your good energy, which I presume is you donating to the cause this morning by being here. I hope to open a few more depths or aspects of the mystery of God's presence all the time, now and now and now. And so actually the theme is a little misleading, because the presence of God isn't so much on a daily basis as a moment-to-moment basis. So it's really now, after now, after now, after now. And so it's living always in the presence of God without effort. I emphasize without effort, because some people try too hard and then they get discouraged because it doesn't respond to effort. It's a gift that you sort of slide into or slip into as you let go little by little of the obstacles to the presence of God. And do you know what the chief obstacle to the presence of God really is? Just thinking that God is absent. Stop thinking that, and God will always be present, because that's the actual fact. So the whole discipline of centering prayer is in the service of learning that the greatest reality about us and about all other things is the presence of God. This is not a thought, but it's not even an experience. It's simply a fact. And that's what I'd like to emphasize this morning, that you don't have to go anywhere to find God or do anything particular, but just stop doing whatever you're doing, especially stop thinking every now and then as a discipline, and after a while you get acquainted with the fact that without thinking, God is always present, and on some secret level of reassurance, call it faith or hope or charity, is always available. And it's only us that are not available to this presence. And so by letting go of any idea or any feeling or any thought that God is absent, the truth of this marvelous existence that God has placed us in, which is really his own existence, begins to become more and more habitual, easy, delightful, reassuring. It doesn't take away suffering, but it takes away any fear of suffering. It's our attitude towards pain and suffering that really causes suffering. Actually, you feel pain, I suppose, but the main thought that we need to get is that you don't have to think about God to be in God's presence. Why is that so hard? Well, it's just that we have habitually learned to think about God, and we identify what we think God is with what God actually is. Not the same thing at all. So God gently but relentlessly undermines any thought that you have of God. Sometimes this is very uncomfortable, depending on how attached you are to your particular idea of God, that usually is colored by childhood impressions or emotionally charged thoughts about God that we picked up in early youth, like the idea that we have to placate God, the idea that we have to earn God's love, the idea that we have to make ourselves lovable to God. Ridiculous. Do you have to make yourself lovable to your mother? And even if your mother is too busy working to love you, grandma is always there, or grandpa, and they have no difficulty because they don't usually have to change the diapers and so on. They can just enjoy your beautiful being as an infant. And so a child in the arms of grandma or grandpa is a good image of what our relationship to God actually is. We're always in the arms of this loving parent or grandparent, and there's nothing you have to do to earn it or to win it. It's already yours. It's free. And so everything about God is a gift. And unfortunately, we've developed a habit of thought which has a basis of truth. Our relation to God should be loving and just and a lot of other shoulds. But it's not going to change how God feels towards you. It only gives you more confidence in God's love if you are at peace with God. So the problem is not with God, it's with us. You don't have to do anything to win this love and it's this faith of God as loving that was the chief thrust of Jesus' teaching, especially in the parables. Parables are kind of windows onto the heart of God that in Jesus' time radically changed or revolutionized the way that his disciples or those who listened to Jesus understood him. The word Father was known among the Jewish prophets, but it usually referred to God as the Father or the Creator or the source or the special patron of Israel. It didn't have the connotations, as a rule, of a particular. In other words, God was the Father of Israel in general, not of particular people. That was the mentality of that particular era. What Jesus suggested is that God is not just Father in the sense of the source of our being at every level. That's certainly true. That's the creative presence of God. So let's distinguish two presences. The creative presence of God that sustains everything in existence, moment by moment, and that sustains us, body, soul, and spirit. At every level of our being, God is present, adjusting himself. Just as God is present to every level of being in the universe. God is just as present to a wave or a particle in the subatomic world that only the most powerful instruments can even perceive. And here is where, in our time, science has become the greatest friend of religion in many ways, because it provides us with what the mystics have always intuited, namely, that everything in creation is interrelated, interconnected, and interdependent. When the Big Bang happened, everything that ever existed was present, physically present, in potentially. And so in the first trillionth of a trillionth of a second, the Big Bang, 13 or 18, it's a little uncertain how many billions of years it actually happened. But the first element was hydrogen. And then as this spread, it transformed into other elements, and finally the elements that are necessary for human life. Usually these are produced when the galaxies crash into each other. Talk about fireworks. God must really enjoy these fireworks. But anyway, when the galaxies collide, they produce the kind of elements that make planets, and planets ultimately produce the kind of elements on which life depends. So as we sit here blissfully in this beautiful space, we're actually the fruit of about, let's say, 15 billion years of preparation. So that you don't think much about having a cup of coffee, but it took 15 billion years to make this possible. That's a plug for the coffee makers, if there ever was one. They haven't thought of advertising in that way. But just to blow your nose, to brush your teeth, to get up in the morning, this is something consciously that has never happened in 15 billion years until the human species finally evolved out of all these other elements and earlier species. So it's a good idea to think that in our normal everyday life, in the little things you do every day, this is a triumph of creation, and God must be very pleased to see us do our little actions. And in comparison with all the wonderful things we're able to do, why should we concentrate on the things that we disapprove of doing so much? Yes, they're important, but the pleasure that God has in each of us, just by being human, and now if you add the good things that you do, then the whole weight of how God looks upon us shifts from the doubts, self-doubts we have about whether we're lovable or whether we're candidates for divine life, is shifted from doubt to a presumption of certitude, not based on ourselves, but on the actual goodness of God in our creation. Well, creation then is absolutely an extraordinary expression of love, and each of us is manifesting in our uniqueness something about the divine goodness that no one else can ever replace. That's your individuality. But we're not just individuals, we're also part of this human species. And in our time, in our century, in our millennium, if the world lasts that long at this rate, at least you can be sure that never before has it been more important to emphasize the unity of the human species or the human family. Jesus in the parables was constantly undermining the societal or social, political or religious boundaries that people keep constantly setting up as a kind of either out of pride or security or power or one of those primitive motives that we function from in very early childhood, since you need them in order to survive. But as we sit here, literally, the most important thing about each of us is not us, but God's presence in us, manifesting the infinite tenderness and love of God in a way that is no one else will ever be able to do. In other words, God is experiencing what it's like to be human in you. And this he seems to find great pleasure in, contrary to whatever you may think about it. So, if you have any doubt that there's any problem with this, those of you who are especially Roman Catholics should remember that the sacrament of reconciliation is one of the 7 sacraments. That means if you ever do something contrary to your conscience, all you have to do is go to confession, and that's the end of it. I would add, however, that you don't have to wait to go to confession. Most of us are doing something 7 to 70 times every day that, we just as soon not have done. I mean, we said a nasty word, or we didn't look at someone who needed a kind smile, or any of the 101 things that we sometimes do when we're not in the presence of God. It's so important to remember that you only have to be sorry now for all of your sins to be wiped away. No need to wait to go to confession. You do that at an appropriate time, if you can find a confessor nowadays. The main thing is that as soon as you're sorry, God has totally forgotten whatever our faults were, and He would be very happy if we would forget it too. As I've said elsewhere, if you have guilt feelings for more than 10 or 15 seconds, it's neurotic. It has nothing to do with genuine contrition or compunction. It's simply the sadness that comes from pride in recognizing that we're not as a big shot or as perfect as we thought we would be. There's a certain, we now know from psychology that there's certain temperamental predispositions towards negative feelings about ourselves. For instance, some people are born with a perfectionistic personality. If anything goes wrong, they blame themselves. Whatever they do, it's never good enough. And so they're constantly harried, you might say, by this shoulds or have-tos. I have to do this to be happy. I have to do this to be faithful. Well, here's a good principle for everyday life. Whatever you feel you have to do, don't do it. Whatever you feel you should do, avoid it. And whatever you feel you must do, go in the opposite direction. And if you feel that you shouldn't do that, then you should do it. Okay. Shoulds, have-tos, musts are temperamental dispositions, and they have really nothing to do with the love of God, but they're rather self-centered or self-serving concerns that are rooted in our security needs, that are always exaggerated. Remember, it's really very simple to figure out what's wrong with us. So simple, so obvious. You look at any baby 1 day old, they're motivated by 3 things: security needs, survival needs, that's 1, affection and esteem and approval needs, that's 2, and power and control needs, that's 3. The latter tends to develop a little later in life. But if you withdraw from the child any one of those needs, it develops overcompensatory programs in order to get what it wants. It soon finds out that if it yells loud enough, it'll get some attention to one of its needs. But this is not the fully human way of responding. This is the way that's appropriate for an infant to get through that particular period of life. But as we grow and become self-conscious, and especially when we reach the age of reason, then we're meant to evaluate our feelings and our needs and to moderate them appropriately, because it's the unlimited desire for security, the unlimited desire for approval, and the unlimited desire for control that is basically the source of all our afflictive emotions. And hence, when your emotions are upset, the body is so designed that it pours suitable hormones into the bloodstream to deal with this crisis, most of them being artificial. But the result is that your poor arteries are squeezed by your tension of the muscles, and you're on the way to a heart attack or some other diseases if you live long enough. And for some people, it's not too long if they're upset. So whatever you think, whatever your belief system is, that's what your feelings respond to, because in everyday life, you're constantly experiencing the frustration of programs for happiness circulating around control, affection and approval, and security that can't possibly be realized because they're fantastic. Nobody's going to respect them. And everybody is practicing the same stupid project. And so you're in competition with 6.5 billion other people trying to do the same stupid thing. Well, naturally, you're going to have tension and stress and diabetes and heart attacks and strokes and what, because the body is being tortured by these afflictive emotions that are activating the physiology of the body to deal with difficulties that normally don't come that fast. There are some real difficulties, and that's when you need to respond with fight or flight mechanisms. But some people are responding every few hours to a crisis. The red lights are always flashing, and somebody is always challenging our demand for happiness through one of those three instinctual needs: power, control, affection, esteem, and approval, and security. And so to return now to this presence of God, I might just add before moving on, however, that when you're confronted by people who are upset, don't be disturbed. The worst they can do is shoot you or something. Then you go to heaven. Death is not a disaster. It's simply the next stage of the spiritual journey once you're thoroughly on it. So one should have a friendly, try to a friendly attitude towards it. It's a promotion. It's not a demolition. Well, anyway, the beauty of this creative support of our being every moment. In other words, creation is not a one-time event, but is going on all the time, every trillionth of a second. And now, by these sophisticated machines, they can calibrate down to a trillionth of a second. So the Buddhists have an intriguing idea that I think is worth thinking about, and that is, they say that we come into and out, and come into and leave and come back into existence 68 times per second. I don't know how they got 68. But in actual fact, modern machinery has revealed that you go in and out of existence maybe a trillion times a second. Well, naturally, with our present sensory apparatus, we don't notice it. So it's like a movie going by very fast. A movie, as you know, is just a series of frames going by at a pace where you don't notice the distinction. It looks like one just because of the speed, a continuous movement. So our life is really a continuous movement of events that is going by so fast you don't notice that you're actually dying every trillionth of a second, a trillion times. Someday, of course, the machines or whatever it is will stop, and I guess that's the end of you in this life. But the beginning of a better arrangement, that's for sure. But besides this creative force that's a sign of God's great love for us and a manifestation of God's love for us, what Jesus reveals is that this is not just any old father, but a Father who he calls Abba. Abba is the Aramaic, that was Jesus' language, term for daddy, or papa, or the old man, or whatever it would be, the idiom that would indicate a loving, very present, very close, and nurturing daddy, the kind of daddy who's constantly picking the child up in his arms and playing with it and kissing it and hugging it and caressing it and taking care of all its needs. So actually, the Father that Jesus reveals is not the patriarchal father that was the popular concept of a head of a household in Jesus' time, but is really more like a mother. In other words, this Father has all the qualities of a loving mother, nurturing, caring, affectionate, holding, always available, always concerned. This reflects the attitude of God, and this is what a contemplative attitude for daily life really comprises. Centering prayer is only a laboratory, so to speak, or, as I've said elsewhere, the office of the divine therapist, in which our wounds or our difficulties in recognizing reality as it actually is are gradually cured. It's a treatment center, only it's a private place within us, as you know, where we leave behind our ordinary concerns and make ourselves totally vulnerable to this presence. Now, if you're scared of this presence, it doesn't feel that comfortable. But what's making you scared of this presence? Your belief system, your ideas. Drop your idea of God during the time of centering prayer, as you know, is recommended. And pretty soon, God has the chance of introducing himself to you as he is, not through a preconceived idea or belief system that may be good in itself, but which you may be misinterpreting, or which may have been misinterpreted for you by well-intentioned but psychologically totally unenlightened teachers. So the ideas that we need to get into our heads if we're going to follow any belief system for this century are to emphasize God's love for us, the unity of the human family, the letting go of fear in any form, which is actually the opposite of love. Remember that when you're afraid of something. The opposite of fear is not necessarily security, it's love. And so as you love more, fear will disappear. As John says in one of his epistles, the evangelist John, perfect love casts out fear. That means it doesn't just get rid of fear, it throws it out, it casts it out. Notice the activity involved in love. You can't love greatly and still have fear. It just goes, it just dissolves. There's no room for fear in the exercise of divine love. And think, if you can remember back to your first few days of life, not too many people can without a certain kind of therapy, but if you could, would you be afraid of resting in the arms of grandpa or grandma? Not at all. You somehow know that this is a safe place. Or in mama's arms, it's a safe place because if she's holding you close, you can hear the reassuring heartbeat that kept you going for the 9 months that you were in the world's most delightful environment that was ever created. So you're reassured. Terrible trauma to be born, they say. I can't remember it. Maybe you can't either. And probably it's just as well. But modern medicine, with all due respect to the medical efforts, was not too enlightened in how to bring children into the world. They got so technically that the first experience of a child and emerging from the most delightful environment there is was to be in this rather cold room with bright lights shining, and it's never seen the light. Masked men and women all around with sharp knives. Who wants to come into that kind of a world? So the first experience of children in those days was trauma, and I guess they still do it a lot. Then they would grab the baby and take it away from its mother and stick it in a bassinet with other screaming youngsters. And the whole contribution of love as touch and affection is withheld at the moment when a baby needs it the most. How important affection, physical affection, manifesting love is for the infant was marvelously exemplified in a piece in the paper I saw not long ago. And this was about two premature youngsters. Each was put in a separate incubator with all the sophisticated modern equipment, the tubes and wires all through it. Poor things. I wonder what a baby figures out life is going to be like when it starts out wrapped up in all these wires. Well, anyway, one of them was going to make it, and the other was obviously dying. So this nurse, contrary to hospital rules, all rules need to have exceptions to be really worthwhile. But anyway, she heroically said, I think we'll try an experiment. And she put the two babies together in the same incubator. Someone took a picture of them. I saw it in the paper. Maybe you saw this. And there you see they're both on their little tummies. You don't see their faces. And the stronger one has its little arm around the shoulder of the one who was dying. In a couple of days, the other child started to get well too. And you could see it in the picture. Very moving little picture. So just that little sign of love, because life is so powerful in supporting itself, was just the straw that added the weight to save this baby's life. So what babies need and what we need is not sophisticated equipment only, but above all, the feeling of being loved and the security that only love can bring. So I venture to say that all of us are only brought into full life or human health or wholeness by being loved. And that means by somebody else. And that means, above all, by God Himself. Nothing is more reassuring than to feel oneself loved by God. And of course, as you know, in centering prayer, this is part of the therapy. Put it into psychological terms. It's the sense that wells up in one as one is silent from the thoughts that usually disturb us or that causes doubts or that are judgmental or evaluative. All of those goals that people have in doing their prayer are left behind in centering prayer. Remember, no desire to have the mind a blank, no desire for an experience of God, no desire for a sense of peace, no expectation for any particular kind of experience. Certainly not making the mind a blank or having no thoughts. It's rather a making ourselves vulnerable to the presence of God, just as God is. That is, beyond thoughts, thinking, experiences. Nothing could be easier. It's just that we think this is hard because we've never done it, or never done it that much. Once you start doing this, this is the paradigm for daily life. Only in daily life, we don't just passively, so to speak, let thoughts that are go by that are harmful or damaging or useless, but in daily life, we make the effort to let go of afflictive feelings, emotions, or thoughts by turning ourselves to the presence of God and remaining there. St. John of the Cross says somewhere that human health consists in the conscious awareness of God. That's what human health is, because in that presence, all the exaggerations that were prompted by a search for happiness that we didn't know how to find are taken away, because one is beginning to taste, however inchoate, or beginning away, we're beginning to sense or taste what happiness really is. And this is the reassurance of God's love for us. And it takes many forms and probably is adapted to each one of our needs, each one of us particular needs. So that if you've had oppression or rejection or heavy loss of loved ones in early life, God will give you what you need, namely the sense that someone more loving than any possible person could be is enfolding you, is holding you up, is pressing you to the mysterious heart of God, which is not a heart as we know it, but is all the connotations or meanings or overtones of a love that we sometimes symbolize by speaking of heart. God is so close that there's no bodily organ that is a symbol of him.